Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. I am here with someone who is probably a very familiar guest if you have kept up with anything Palantir over the past couple of years, and also if you have kept up with the Palantir Weekly podcasts, because I'm here with my co-host, Arny. Arny, thank you for being here.
Yo, thank you for having me here.
So I wanted to do a podcast with Arny because it's been a long time where Arny and I just sat down and talked to each other. And I got to ask him some questions about what his personal investing philosophy is and also everything around his thought process around Palantir. The stock has reached a 52-week high at around 37 bucks. I think we hit 38 for a bit. And Arny was someone who was covering the company very deeply with a couple of other people on the internet when the stock fell all the way to $6. And he was also buying and pretty much went all in at the time and is currently still basically like 95% in for Palantir. So, Arny, I want to start off the podcast with what has the past couple of months been, and like how are you feeling on the day-to-day knowing that not only are you all in on a stock that's up 3-4x from when you bought it, but also the fact that you're a content creator and you've been covering the stock and its journey over the past couple of years?
Can I say that is not just the last couple of months, weeks, but it's just these last years that have been completely crazy and completely transforming not only the way we live, but also the way we, and I personally, invest. Everything started from just, look at this company, but this was like before COVID, like 4 or 5 years ago. It was, this company looks very intriguing, very, very interesting. Like they use essentially data to help spotting the terrorism. Like, wow, like if they're able to do this, they must be able to do anything. And it turns out that gradually that is actually the plan. But there was essentially no information about the company. So I just got intrigued. And then when the company decided, okay, let's go DPO, I was, okay, now I start studying it for what I can. And
Right.
it was insane because it was that weird feeling that the more you study something, the less you understand.
Yeah.
And when something like that happens, then I just get crazy and I need to know everything about it. And that knowledge, that craving for knowledge is what brought us here because, yes, as an investor, I became more and more confident, but it was also the crave for understanding that I think made us converge into making daily content, weekly podcast, for both of us, Friday night, Saturday morning. That's a painful
It was a pain in the
hour.
ass, especially when the stock was at $6. It's a pain in the ass to do a podcast. Yeah, I get it. You know. Okay, so when Palantir was 6, take me through what your life was like at the time. How did you have the wherewithal to say, you know what, this is going to be the stock that either makes or breaks me? And I mean, you want to be a fund manager in the future. You want to manage millions, if not tens of hundreds of millions of dollars. A stock either makes or breaks a fund manager. Tesla made Cathie Wood, Dan Ives, Ross Gerber. For you, it was Palantir. Why Palantir?
It started from getting intrigued, but it was after like 1 year and a half, almost 2 years, that I had the confidence, okay, this is my bet. And it became my bet because I realized that even if the numbers were actually bad, we can say at a certain point they even sucked. What was all around the numbers was showing a picture that was a complete anomaly. Like I never studied a company that was so deep into the philosophy that brought the company to life and the progresses that the company was actually making that were not really recognized in the numbers and then in the story. So what I faced was what I called the biggest asymmetry in my life as an investor, which essentially created the milestone, like the framework with which now I seek to invest. I've been a long-term value investor since I started getting more and more interested about studying companies from a fundamental standpoint almost 10 years ago. I also worked as an analyst so that I could have the skills to actually understand when I see numbers, okay, how this number actually fits into the broader picture. But my investment approach was quite linear. Okay, I just buy excellent companies, industrial companies that just needs to keep compounding. And it is only with COVID then I started approaching also the tech companies. And I was so intrigued by Peter Thiel 0 to 1 that made me realize, okay, what I was doing was okay, while in my mind that was already, wow, I'm actually good. And then I realized, oh, whoa, like I'm missing completely something that is just 10x better in terms of understanding. But it requires a lot of work. And Palantir was a lot of work. But I realized that one crucial thing that I think most people underestimate. When you love a company, when you're obsessive over a company, then you start noticing things that most people don't see or will just see later. And that is what created us essentially an edge to get confident even when everything was literally going bad, because the stock was down, there was a slowdown in the business. Everybody was furious because meanwhile the interest rates were rising, all the market was dropping. Personally, I didn't have a job. I just broke out with my girlfriend. I was not feeling fit, but had one confidence. Okay, I know here I'm not wrong, and I'm not wrong for multiple reasons. I know when I study something very well, I know I can get confident, and I tried to triangulate all the possible approaches, all the possible mental models and Excel models to say, okay, the degree of uncertainty here is high, but I know I can manage that uncertainty. And if I'm right, that output will be so big that will make my effort and the risk worth it. Now, there were many things that we couldn't know, but what we were really sure was what we were discussing at Palantir Weekly. The company seemed bad, but in reality, they were creating a monster. And it was not that the company was bad, it was the company was misunderstood. So that asymmetry became my moment of truth. But this word asymmetry is now what is defining more and more the way I look at things. If I'm not able to distinguish what's the reality, what's the narrative, and I can only know what is the discrepancy if I'm obsessive, it means that I can't have an edge. I'm expected to get normal returns.
So this idea of asymmetric investing, basically Palantir was your guinea pig on being able to discover alpha that was not yet discovered by the market because there was a narrative that the market didn't understand, but that you understood. Can you speak a little bit on why that asymmetric approach or philosophy to investing is required to find the next Palantir?
Well, the idea is the market, academics say, is efficient, but it can't be too efficient by definition, because otherwise there would be no Warren Buffett, there would be no great investor. I believe it is generally true that the market is efficient in capturing the new information available. You'll see that every day with your daily stream, that as soon as there is a news, boom, the price reacts. And that creates an environment where it is very difficult to have an edge. But on the other side, if you can have that edge, then you are set to perform. Sorry, I got I lost one question. Sorry, what was again the question?
That's the good part of editing. So why do you think an asymmetric approach is necessary for finding the next Palantir?
Okay, so if it is true that the price incorporates what is already known, the only way that you can have an edge is having a superior understanding where you know things that the market still don't accept. And that the asymmetry lies there. With Palantir Weekly, for instance, already last year, we had like 120 episodes of daily thinking of, okay, this is how things really are. We got also some trauma. We got some threats. Oh, Snowflake is a competitor, or Microsoft is a competitor. But look, every time there is something like that, first you get shocked, but then you start re-elaborating, and it's like internalizing the trauma before it happens, so that when the newspapers come out, the SPACs, it's like, come come on, we already digested all this stuff like 4 months ago.
Right.
And the newspapers wanted to push the negative narrative as the stock was dropping. So there, at that moment, you have two choices. Or you get scared because you don't know exactly what you're doing. Or in the other hand, if you are aware, you know what is real, you know what is okay, but you know that at the end of the day, it's not really a problem, which was the case with SPACs and with all the other negative stuff. Palantir is a consultancy. It's like that was probably the biggest thing investors struggle to deal with. And at a certain point, it's not false that Palantir acted as a consultancy. But if your reasoning stops there, then you don't understand what you're dealing with. Because yes, there was a more consultancy component, but it was not the end goal. That more consultancy component where the forward deployment engineer goes to companies to help these companies solve problem is what is actually needed to make Palantir the best software company in the world, because you need to have that component, that eating pain component, so that Palantir could become better as a platform and solve what other software can't actually solve. So there are these little steps that often are just there in front of everybody. But if people don't really want to accept because they don't have enough obsession, enough knowledge, compounded knowledge, then there is the alpha component, the alpha information that is there, just in front of everybody, but nobody wants to accept it. And it's no different from what Peter Thiel keeps saying, the world is full of secrets. Like the best companies are the ones built on secrets. Right. And I would argue the best investment opportunities are the ones where there are some secrets that people haven't figured it out yet. And we understood, hey, we get the secret now.
Why did Wall Street completely miss Palantir when it was in the single digits?
I think there was a component that related to the general sphere of professionals. I noticed that on one side, tech professionals were the ones hinting, oh, this is a consultancy company, it doesn't scale, stuff like that, which influenced also the financial professional component. As I worked as an analyst and I worked previously in investment banking in a fund, I saw why people were reasoning that way. On average, the financial industry is full of smart people that tend to reason in herd. So it's and even if taken individually, they're very smart. In aggregate, they tend to be very dumb. And that was the case I understood with Palantir, because when people were talking about Palantir, then they were completely biased from the things that they already read online. They put the label, oh, Palantir is a meme stock. Okay, so it must be bad. But I haven't seen financial professionals really trying to understand what was going on. And let's be honest, the superficial picture was not that appealing. It was a company that initially was starting to grow very fast, then it slowed down, but the stock-based compensation was very high. They preferred to do a DPO rather than an IPO, essentially saying, F you, Wall Street. So all the people in the financial sphere were preferring something that was less controversial. And controversy was the key word that every time someone talked about Palantir, the word that emerged. Every single time, every single title of a newspaper, Palantir, the controversial spy company backed by Peter Thiel, who backed Trump. And the truth is that when you work in the financial industry, you realize that people want to be super smart, but at the end of the day, they need to deal with the reality, which is they need the client's money to do stuff.
And so we have to recommend the safe things at the end of the day.
So in order to make clients feel well, they need to recommend something that already many people are feeling okay to recommend.
Yeah.
And I remember this particular comment when stuff were very bad at the bottom, that, how can I'm supposed to recommend this investment to my committee? Like, imagine how hard it is. Like, it was hard for us to get the conviction, to get the due diligence, but imagine how hard it is if your job is not only studying, understanding, but then trying to convince someone else who hasn't done the same due diligence into spending hours in the life just to understand, okay, what the F is an ontology and why this is needed. So
Right.
for financial professionals, it was just a controversy that was probably not worth digging into. And if many people in the financial industry, no big fund managers, no big analysts were covering the company, it's like, it means that it's not really interesting. The mindset is if there were $5 on the ground, probably someone else would have already taken that. So let's leave the $100 there. But you noticed when Dan Ives started covering, Keith started covering, then the company started to increase the numbers, and it became more and more evident, okay, this is not a consultancy company. This is actually a very profitable company. This is a company that is penetrating perfectly in the field where all the money is going through, the AI wave. Then the narrative changed, and now suddenly financial professionals, oh, this is the best company I've ever seen in 25 years. Buongiorno, Fiorellino.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of the mainstream media analysts start to pick up on the Palantir story. I agree. I think Wall Street did not take the time to learn about what an ontology is. They did not take the time to actually care about the nuances of the government business. They saw at the time, unprofitable company that was diluting, and that was it. Whereas people like you and I, we saw something just exciting there. Can you speak a little bit to what was exciting outside of the technology, the kind of persona of Palantir? Was it Alex Karp? Was it, the philosophy of the Western values? What actually kept you excited about them?
I told you before that my investment approach previously, before COVID, before Palantir, was very much into excellent industrial companies, essentially all in Italy. And, when you study businesses in Italy, it's like or they're excellent or they're trash. And the interesting stuff is they tend to stay the same for many years. So the excellent companies that I studied 10 years ago are still excellent now. And the same is worth also for the other stuff. But why? Because the key point when you invest in companies like that is you invest in the business mainly. When you invest in tech, there is, yes, the business component, but there is one side that is probably not really valued by Wall Street, but I think it is the one that changes everything, which is understanding the leadership and the culture of the leadership. I think we got an edge because by studying obsessively Karp and the management, we realized the philosophy behind the company, and we realized that when there was pain, short-term pain, it was due to a reason, but the trajectory was unchanged. And when you see a leader like Karp, first is like you get intrigued or you get disgusted. And the financial professionals were disgusted by Karp. And Karp didn't hide from the fact that he didn't like the approach of the banking industry. So you need to understand who you're dealing with. And with Karp, I realized, okay, this guy is weird. But when you deal with someone who's weird and you understand that he's very smart, it's like, okay, or he's a con artist, or he's probably one of the best entrepreneurs in the world. I think nobody could say, oh, Peter Thiel is actually enjoyable to anyone, okay? But this is what happens when you deal with a genius. It's like, or you like it, or you say, oh. Now that it is clear that Alex Karp is a genius that is able to navigate the company through good places, now everybody sees the good side of it. But when things were not clear that way, you needed to understand deeply what was the motivation behind carp behind the management, and only when you realized, okay, there is a philosophy inside the company that you could actually write an entire book around the philosophy of the company and how all the principles of the company were related to the philosophy of Peter Thiel, then you realize, okay, I need to get deeper and deeper. And, carp was initially very criticized for strong claims of the guidance 30%, and that was something that also on my side made me a bit, okay, I need to be more careful because I trust the guy, but this made me think, okay, I need to be more careful. So I judged very carefully all the claims that he was making and how all the claims then reflected in the future. And
Right.
once you started saying, okay, guys, I'm not joking, the world is dangerous, there are bad things that could easily break out in closer to the Russian border. Be careful, guys. When you see carp, okay, analysts are trashing on us, but let's see in 2 years. And then you start seeing this repetition of, okay, what carp says seems a mad guy with a weird hair. And then that becomes reality. And then you see that his approach he's not aimed on, okay, we need to maximize money now, but he's driven by values. And if the value is unlocked, then that value becomes money for business. Then you realize, okay, there's a full round person that I want to be the leader of the company. And to get back to the initial point, in a traditional business is more about the business. When you deal with tech, the only constant is change. And only when you have a very strong leadership that is able to inspire people and capture waves, there is where you can have an amazing tech company. And I saw that with Palantir.
I agree. I mean, the leadership and management part is just so interesting. I remember listening to Carp's first interviews and him breaking down this like argument that the world is dangerous and there's this like kinetic war that you could be facing, and he's spinning a book on his finger. It's like, what is this? Like, what is going on? And then you're just like, wait a second, this guy's really cool. And it's just like, sometimes when you have a CEO and someone who can speak the narrative of his philosophy and then attach it with the numbers, which they've done over the past couple of quarters, you start to get something where people just want to buy into that vision and get excited for the ride. So that leads me to my next question. Palantir is worth $80 billion right now. What do you think can take Palantir to $1 trillion one day?
The famous $1 trillion question was very discussed since the beginning because I think when you study this company deep, you realize that, oh, this is essentially a big tech. It's just a big tech in a tiny size. And if you think of it, potentially we are already with the kernel needed, the nucleus needed to get to $1 trillion company. Because what Palantir essentially does is building software to build software for whatever use case. When there is a decision to be made, potentially you can have a software helping you driving that decision. And we saw Palantir essentially is into every vertical, and not only for general purposes stuff that could be across verticals, but also into very, 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 very specific fields. So if we think as a software investor analyst, we need to think, okay, Palantir is an horizontal company, also a horizontal software, which means a software that can be deployed into many industries, keeping the same core software. But
Right.
at the same time, we are dealing with a vertical software, which typically have a just narrow forum. They work in oil and gas, and they provide software to make the drilling more efficient. But wait a second, Palantir does that for the oil sector, for the army, AI targeting. Then you go to Skywise, and then you have Palantir helping managing I don't know how many airlines right now. Meanwhile, helping Airbus with the manufacturing process. It's like, wait a second, is there something that Palantir can do? Well, the more we go through this journey, it seems that on the software side, on the use case, enterprise case, use cases, it seems that there is nothing Palantir can actually do. But if this is true, it means that the only problem is scale. We said Palantir is a big tech, but at a tiny size. So what Palantir right now just needs to do is acquiring customers, expanding the relationships with the existing customers, and become de facto the operating system of the modern enterprise. And if that happens, all the enterprise and government market would be already enough to get this 1 trillion. There was this strong debate. Palantir needs like a B2C product to get there because all the $1 trillion companies have a B2C component. And that's actually true. But in reality, no other software companies have such a wide and deep ability to solve value across essentially any place. So the reality is, if you think of ServiceNow, already like a $200 billion company, Salesforce, a similar size, like closer to 300. So if it is true that Palantir is like one of them, but way better, because it is like them, but with the ability also to penetrate into very specific fields, into any enterprise, into any sector, then the potential is just unlimited.
Yeah, I agree. The original thesis I had for Palantir back in 2021 was that I felt their software could be used in every single vertical, in every single industry. Now, I didn't fully understand Foundry or Gotham, but I had a hunch that if BP is using it, if Airbus is using it, they have 557 customers right now doing almost 3 billion in revenue. Like 500 customers, 3 billion in revenue. That's unheard of. That's just unheard of. And it's because the company has such transformational software that the clients that they're getting are staying for a long time. And that's why you get these extensions. And that's why these clients can't really see themselves without using Palantir, which is exciting because that shouldn't scale to $1 trillion theoretically. That should scale maybe to a couple $100 billion. But it kind of makes you think maybe that's a software that could scale to $1 trillion.
Look, you said something that is very valuable. It can be that as a client, you pay like 50K for a software that at the end of the day doesn't really give you an edge. It could be, and then you say, okay, you know what? Your software is not very useful. Bye-bye. But if you see something like the relationship Palantir has with BP, Airbus, so the oldest commercial clients, the Army also, and you notice that the top 3 clients have an average of $100 million per year, you realize, wait a second, let me check what other companies can actually do something like that. And you realize that no one discloses something that is barely comparable. You realize, okay, these are few companies that embrace Palantir this deeply. But what happens if many more companies can actually do that?
Right.
You don't spend $100 million for a mistake.
Right. Right. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Karp. You said he was a kind of like a weird guy, a crazy guy, in a good way, right? He's very eccentric. Do you think he's the right guy to be leading Palantir?
I think he's the right guy in this moment in time. There is something that our friend Emir and I love about Damodaran. He says companies are like people. They have a timeline. They born and then they grow. They become more mature, and eventually they die. And in every single stage, the company needs to accept what it is. Obviously, it needs to try to improve what it is, but it needs to be in the position where it maximizes the value from the position where it is. Palantir seems an old company because on paper it has 20 years. And that was actually another critique people on the financial field had. It's like, you have been around for 20 years. Why you're not profitable?
Why are you not profitable?
Yeah, you suck, no?
Yeah.
And then again, you need to understand what's the philosophy behind the company. It's like have been, I think, around for 20 years with the inability to extract value from customers, or there is something more. And that something more deeply relates into why Carp is the right person to lead Palantir, because only someone who has had the patience for 20 years not to extract the most value from customers in terms of maximizing profits, maximizing revenues, but building the basis to become the most valuable company in the world is the right person to a company that is still in its infancy, despite it on paper it has 20 years. What I mean with that is 20 years is a lot for a company. You expect in 20 years a company to be already very profitable. It's almost insane to think that Meta was born more or less in the same years of Palantir. I don't remember if barely before or later, but those same years. And
Right.
Meta is already $1 trillion company, printing a crazy amount of free cash flow and stuff. But if you think, okay, what is the more mature company? It's like I feel Meta has already done the best of its life. Now is like in her 30, 35. So it's like very energetic still, but the best years have done. So it can still do a great deal of great things. But when I look at Palantir, I can't say this is a company at its 30s. I
Right.
think it's much more in the teenage stuff, in the
Yeah.
teenage tire, just getting into adulthood by entering the S&P 500, by becoming profitable. And it's like, wait a second, but if this company is actually getting there and is only now a teenager company, getting into adulthood, it means that for 20 years, they've been doing something to set the basis for the next coming 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Right.
And when you first study Palantir, you think, oh, this company was unprofitable because they went around for 20 years without the ability to make money. But the reality was, and you understand deeply this when you understand the business model, the philosophy behind the company, when you hear the podcast that we made with Matthew Babin and Chad. So you realize that these 20 years, Palantir built the software to be ready for this moment. It's insane to think you build something because you realize that the system, how actually worked, is not working. So you create your own way, betting that on 10 years, 20 years later, that will be accepted as a superior way of doing things. And it's only thanks to that 20 years that Palantir spent by building Foundry, building all the software infrastructure needed to build new software, that Palantir, when the opportunity emerged with AIP, was able to build AIP very rapidly, change their go-to-market with bootcamps, and then scaling up as fast as they're doing now. But it's only now that we can capitalize on these 20 years of work.
Sometimes good things take a little time. That's all. Sometimes they take time. Peter Thiel has sold about $700 million of stock in the past week. People are probably watching this in the next week, October 10th-ish time. This is going to be posted. And maybe Peter Thiel sold more than $700 million worth of shares. Why aren't you trimming your position aggressively like Peter is? What is kind of your logic behind at $37 still holding on to a majority of your shares?
Well, I put myself in a position where I already trimmed the amount I needed to be comfortable not making moves.
Right.
The idea is or you stay very active into into exploiting each single movement, or you say, okay, you know what? I have enough cash aside so that I don't have the impulse, the rush into making too many decisions. I just let it compound because I realized it was a painful mistake in hindsight that The big problem is when you see big variations, and those variations affect the way of thinking. Especially if, like me right now, you don't have like a steady income at the end of the month, knowing that, okay, I know I have all the expenses covered. Like I need to play defense on that side. And for me, it is important to have some cash aside so that I can say, okay, I can focus into building the path I really want. And as an investor, I don't need to rush to follow the market. I can be very strategical into wait for a big opportunity, for a big asymmetry to emerge. So
Right.
I personally like to have a big position, and on the side having some cash that I know is just there, that gives me my mental calmness. When I see an insider like Peter Thiel selling, I think, okay, it's probably rational on his side to to
Take
get
some off the top.
some
Yeah.
profits out. That doesn't mean that he doesn't believe the company will get into a big monster, because otherwise he would have sold completely. There are also some tax implications, I think, is worth considering, because what Buffett is doing is quite anomalous, essentially cutting aggressively Apple, cutting Bank of America. That made me think, okay, Peter Thiel is also very involved into, well, Buffett is not involved, but Peter Thiel is involved into politics indirectly right now with Vance. He knows that there is a serious risk if some changes in capital gains taxes could also affect him. So maybe that's something that goes into his mind. And then there's another thought that I think is marginal but still relevant. Consider that these guys are still paid every year in shares,
Yeah.
and they still have options to execute. So yes, is a good way for them to cash out a bit, but at the end of the day, it's not that they sold the entire shares, they are out of the company, they're telling you, okay, I'm done with this.
Right. Some people have been saying Palantir at $37 is similar to Tesla at $400 back in October of 2021. Palantir is at 37 right now, $80 billion market cap. At that point, Tesla was a $1 trillion market cap in October of 2021. Tesla then over the next 5 months fell by 35%, got to around 260, which is still higher than what it is right now. If Palantir were to have that same 35% decline, you would see Palantir at around $22 by March of 2025 in the same time frame. My thoughts on this are Tesla went up during zero interest rates and then came down as interest rates hiked up. Palantir proved itself, which was much harder to do when interest rates were 5.5% to get to this valuation. And now we're going to get into interest rates coming down, which in general is a good macro tailwind for every company, along with the fact that AI in 2021 wasn't a thing. AI in 2024 is a real thing. What are your thoughts on the current valuation and the idea that Palantir at 37 is too aggressive and in the next 5 months it might be much cheaper?
I think it is fair to say that the valuation is expensive right now. It was not expensive, it was actually very cheap, below 10. Last year, it was really difficult to understand, okay, what's going on, because on the surface, it appeared expensive, but when you looked behind the surface, you saw that the numbers were changing very rapidly. And now we are in the phase where, yes, the company is really rocketing, is really firing on all cylinders on the business side, but also the price reflects that. So our job is as investors is realizing, okay, what is actually incorporated into these estimates? And on a more qualitative side, I would say what people are actually understanding of Palantir versus the total understandable things that you could understand and appreciate. And for instance, when you notice the analyst estimates, you realize that apart from 2024, which eventually now we are already almost at the end of it, have good growth estimates. When you look with terminals, what analysts expect for 2025, 26, you realize that they expect a 20% growth for the coming years. And then you think a little bit, it's like, wait a second, but these were the same estimates that they had when Palantir was at the bottom. And since last year to now, the dynamic of the business changed completely. The business is becoming way more profitable on one side, yes, but also the growth estimates are completely changing, driven by the success of AAP, which is matching perfectly the skyrocketing demand of AI. And there is one thing that I think people on Wall Street are not really understanding is when you have a brand that becomes very strong, that completely lowers the frictions for new customer adoption. And I think to drive a parallelism with Tesla, what analysts didn't understand back then was the viral effect that Tesla was having. That was what triggered the mass adoption at essentially zero marginal cost, because Tesla was not really spending into acquiring new customers, because there was this virality effect that was sucking people in. Now, Palantir is an enterprise company, is not a B2C company. So as long as, despite Carp is a very cool, cool guy, the work in advertising, in increasing awareness is still needed, especially because the past stigma of, oh, you're a controversial company. Yet, we are already seeing signs that Palantir is becoming more and more viral and recognized and appreciated in the media space. On one side, I think we are contributing a little bit, but on the more institutional side, Palantir went from being this ugly duckling to being a very respected company. And what's very peculiar is that Palantir is the only one that at the same time is getting success in the enterprise world and in the government world. And what was seen as a bad thing, oh, Palantir is involved with the CIA, blah, blah, blah. Now, people are starting to understand that that is not something controversial or bad, but that's actually something you need to be very proud as an investor, especially when you start seeing that what Carp was saying, oh, we shape history with our software. Seemed like, oh, what the F are you saying? Like, seems like a Twitter post of those guys that say some abstract, dreamy assertion. It's like, what are you saying?
Yeah, he's lived up to it. He's lived up to that thesis at a very high level. What has been your journey covering Palantir? Like, have you enjoyed the process of being a full-time content creator?
I loved every day of it, but I would argue it was not easy, especially at the beginning, especially when the times were were obviously tougher, because imagine every day there was some negative stuff that was coming out, and since you are exposing yourself, you are essentially betting all your time, your money, your reputation into defending a company where you believe in. And every day I was getting like hundreds of comments, angry comments, because or people were down or people were trolling. And I know that there is a little fun into trolling, but those are the moments that shape you as a creator and shape you as an investor. You know, Buffett famously said, being an entrepreneur makes me a better investor. Being an investor makes me a better entrepreneur. I would say being a content creator is a small side of being an entrepreneur. Obviously, easier than building a massive company like Palantir, but still, it requires the same kind of decision making, the same kind of responsibility. And you realize that there are very few moments that could be heavily defining for your your destiny. I had the honor and pleasure, as you say, to join this journey with you, having had also tough conversations. It's like, are we making a stupid thing into being this committed, into being so much skin in the game? And then we realized, okay, actually, what if it is stupid not to do this?
It's almost like I love how you frame call options. It's like call options are risky in the stock market, but sometimes like whoever bought $15 call options for Palantir when it was $7 for 2 years out, it was stupid to not do that, you know, because there was such an obviously there's still a risk, but there was such an asymmetric risk to reward there. So when you and I kind of built our brands primarily around Palantir 2 years ago and like went all in on like this is the company we're going to bet on, it's led to a lot of upside. We got to meet Alex Karp, Sham Sanker, AIPCon. I mean, like a lot of things have happened. Obviously, the stock going up has helped those opportunities happen, but it was a hell of a risk. I mean, you're right. Did you ever feel in those moments that was there ever a point where you were like, oh my God, like my life is over. I legit committed to this company and this company's like a piece of shit.
I never thought I was wrong into the decision on choosing Palantir, but I was very scared of myself not having the mental calmness to actually wait until that was recognized.
Yeah. No, that's fair.
Especially not having an income. It was okay. I really can't f this up. Like I need to be sure that I'm making the right stuff. But if I'm truly right, as I think I am, this will be my best investment and the
Right.
one that will define my investment approach. So
let's end out with this last question. What is the future for you? I mean, like, what do you want to do in 5 years? Do you still want to be making content? Do you want to manage $100 million? Like, how are you thinking of your future career as an investor? Do you want the name Arny Trezzi to be up there with Stanley Druckenmiller one day?
Well, that's the goal. But I have to tell you, I started investing very, very obsessively with the idea that I want to become better than Warren Buffett, but not because I need to get to billions. I want billions to become the consequence of having my mental approach trained to the best level that I can actually try to achieve. So rather than seeing the output as the goal, I see the process of Arny becoming better and better to say the mental Olympiads of the journey of becoming the best investor you can. I made a sport for since I was a little kid, but I was never good into like I was at the agonistic level of swimming. I played basket. I made many stuff, but I never felt okay. This is my sport.
Right.
And with investing, I felt okay. This could be my sport. I still understand that I know nothing, but I feel that if I train myself well, I can do it very well. Now, every day you realize that you can get a bit closer, but I think no other discipline like investing really requires a lot of time, a lot of mental trauma to really improve. And yes, the long-term goal is to become like a Druckenmiller, but not with a goal of I want to manage $100 billion funds or whatever. I want to reach the point where I say, okay, I'm doing the best I can into deploying my decision-making mindsets into an investment approach that I enjoy doing and helps me connect with other people that like this way of investing. Then managing money for someone else or on my own, I think is just a consequence of what are the will be the opportunities and what will be also my needs at that time. But what I really care is trying to build my own approach, which I realized that started from a very classical approach about investing, then was a bit more permeated from the famous Italian Warren Buffett, Giovanni Tamburi, and then is absorbing a lot of Peter Thiel in the making. And I hope the way I invest will be more defined and eventually inspire other people to realize, okay, even if I'm not a financial professional, I can get an edge and exploit that edge into building an investment approach that works, but that is tailored on my skills.
It's interesting. It's like Palantir, and your investment in Palantir has given you the freedom currently to kind of do what you want to do, right? And live your life.
Mm-hmm.
And get to manage your own money, which is a really cool thing to do, but for yourself, for a living. And as the company grows and as your personal assets grow, that's when you have bigger problems because you have to manage more money, right? And eventually, if you get really good at that, it gets to the point where other people might want you to manage their money. And if you can do a really good job for them, it just compounds. So it's one of those things where just getting that first one right and going through the pain you went through over the past couple of years of Palantir, it seems like it's done very well for you.
Look, if I was working traditionally in an investment fund, if I didn't fail the investment project that I tried to build a small investment holding with another guy before COVID, so if I just continued my regular path as an analyst, or maybe I was working into a regular fund, I would have not been able to develop this approach, because the life in a fund, in a hedge fund, is very, very different. You are not really allowed to get obsessive into something, because your job is to generate investment ideas. I believe the alpha is not generated by generating investment ideas, but on the contrary, to become obsessive into something that triggers your interest. That's why I underscore a lot that I believe that the investment journey needs to be very personal, so that you can try to maximize the output of your specific skills and your interest. I think it's similar to what Palantir does. The financial industry really wants well-rounded figures. And at the end of the day, you look at that all financial professionals have the same kind of pedigree, the same kind of way of thinking and talking. And then you look at Palantir and you realize, wait a second, each one is made on its own. And actually the management itself tells you, we don't want well-rounded figures. We want people that have some spikes into their behavior. And rather than imposing a structure into that spike, we take that spike and we build a role around that spike, so that that person can really maximize his way of expressing. And I believe also investing is much more fun, but also delivers much more output when it's done in a way that expresses yourself,
right?
Like software.
Right.
And I truly believe that having the freedom to actually wake up every morning and say, okay, I love to study Palantir, I want to know more, and I'm happy to share these thoughts with other people that are as interested as me, gave me this hedge. And I think this approach could be cultivated and could generate alpha in the way.
I love it. That's Arny, folks. Thank you for joining, Arny. Thank you for being a friend to me over these past couple of years. I deeply, deeply appreciate it. I know our long conversations at AIPCon, staying up all night talking about Palantir and investing, it's stuff I'm going to cherish for the rest of my life. So thank you, Arny. Appreciate it. You guys can follow him below on his Twitter and YouTube, and I will talk to you soon on Palantir Weekly.
Thank you, and see you soon. Ciao.
See you guys.